According to Russia's RIA state news agency, the West stands to lose at least $288 billion in frozen Russian assets if they are confiscated. Is it conceivable that the current sanctions imposed by the European Union and the United States were a mistake? This aggressive campaign against Russia has backfired, as Russia has responded with additional sanctions and is seizing all Western-owned enterprises and assets in the nation, particularly those of US and EU banks. On December 28th, Russia's foreign ministry issued a reaction to the current round of sanctions, listing various implications as retaliation against the United States and the European Union. What would be the result of these sanctions? How would the West respond to these sanctions? This video will explain everything in depth. On December 16th, 2024, the European Union imposed additional sanctions against Russia. This new round of economic sanctions is the 15th imposed on the Kremlin since 2022, with the goal of further isolating Russia economically and diplomatically. Now that Putin's administration has responded with countermeasures, it is expected that more than $280 billion in Western assets would be targeted. These are assets within Russia's boundaries. We are entering a new chapter of geopolitical tensions between the United States, the European Union, and Russia. How will this influence both sides? Interestingly, the West has a significant edge. In terms of the value of Russian assets, it has frozen compared to the assets Russia can collect from Western corporations. According to recent estimates, the West has frozen around $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves and other assets. Worldwide, this comprises funds held at numerous financial institutions in Europe and the United States. European banks have the biggest proportion, approximately 27 billion EUR in Europe. American institutions are next, with $67 billion in US dollars, followed by £37 billion in British pounds in UK banks. Japanese financial institutions have $36 billion in yen, while lesser quantities of $19 billion in Canadian dollars and $6 billion in Australian dollars are stored overseas. These monies are typically invested in foreign stocks, bank accounts, or transactions, making them easier for Western governments to track down and seize. What about the oligarchs? In addition to governmental reserves, Russian millionaires have received scrutiny. Their boats, luxurious mansions, and private aircraft have all been confiscated. For example, Germany seized Alisher Usmanov's $750 million yacht and $90 million in real estate in Jersey. Officials froze $7 billion of Roman Abramovich's interests. Italy seized Nikita Malpin's gorgeous Sardinian property, valued at more than $14 million. Other European nations, like France and Spain, have seized houses and yachts belonging to Russian aristocracy. Overall, these seizures total almost $58 billion. The West utilized tough sanctions and legal means to freeze these assets. Governments worked together through a task force named RIO, Russian elites, proxies, and oligarchs, to trace and seize riches across borders. Banks played an important role in identifying and storing Russian cash, as required by law. When comparing the two sides, the West holds the advantage. Russia's central bank has frozen $300 billion, which combined with the oligarchs' $58 billion in confiscated assets, exceeds what Russia can manage. However, this has not prevented Russia from issuing a regulation in July 2024 that would legitimize the process of seizing these assets. This is where Russia will have some difficulties. The $300 billion in Russian assets, frozen by the West, are mostly concentrated and stored in financial institutions that may be easily accessed to execute sanctions. In contrast, Russia's $288 billion in Western assets is more dispersed and scattered across several industries and firms, making coordinated seizure more difficult. Seizing all of these assets would be challenging, but not impossible. This is why the West takes the threat seriously. So, how will Russia carry out these sanctions? Russia has taken a hard line in reaction to Western sanctions. The Kremlin's retribution is targeted and purposeful, aimed at making life difficult for Western corporations working within its borders. If a corporation wishes to exit the Russian market, it must sell its assets at a 50% discount. Essentially, this implies that enterprises must endure significant financial losses simply to exit the Russian market. Furthermore, the tax on asset transactions has been increased from 15% to 35%, beginning in October 2024. This exit tax is obviously intended to impose enormous financial difficulties on international enterprises, while also giving a financial benefit to the Russian government. But the anguish does not end there. Western corporations also face rigorous controls on how they may transfer revenues out of Russia. By restricting tax repatriation, Russia ensures that money remains in its economy rather than being routed back to Western headquarters. This strategy is calculated. It not only hampers operations for foreign enterprises, but also attempts to stabilize Russia's economy during a difficult period. Russia is also targeting people like EU diplomats, who would be barred from visiting the country. This makes it harder for these individuals to reach an agreement with the Russian government and may have diplomatic consequences. Big brands like Carlsberg and Danone are already feeling the heat. Carlsberg, a big participant in the Russian beer industry, will be greatly impacted by this. The corporation now faces tougher government scrutiny and is being compelled to sell its assets at a sharp discount, resulting in massive financial losses. Danone, the French food behemoth, isn't doing much better. Danone, which has made considerable investments in Russia's dairy sector, is caught in the crossfire. The limits on transferring revenues out of the country are a major burden for businesses, making it difficult to manage their international activities. Most recently, in December 2024, a former Exxon company owner took over all of Danone's operations in Russia. This completed the Russian acquisition of the French enterprise. But this goes well beyond Carlsberg and Danone. Larger organizations are also caught up in this dilemma. Take PepsiCo, for example. Pepsi has operated in Russia since the 1970s, establishing a vast enterprise that includes local brands and production facilities. However, with sanctions in place, the corporation faces significant challenges, including limits on transferring revenues out of Russia and the possibility of selling its assets at a steep price. This might result in not just financial losses, but also substantial disruptions to their supply chain and staff. Interestingly, Pepsi and Coca-Cola continue to operate in Russia, but they are unable to transfer revenues outside of the nation. Similarly, ExxonMobil, which invested billions of dollars in Russia's oil and gas sector, was forced to depart without withdrawing any assets. With high taxes and the possibility of expropriation, the energy giant's Russian investments are likely to decrease considerably. Ford, which was formerly a major participant in the Russian automobile industry with its local production units, is now facing asset seizures and forced sales. These new restrictions aren't only affecting income, they are changing the way these corporations function in an uncertain geopolitical environment. Unilever is a prime example of this. In Europe, the firm is well known for its varied range of culinary and personal care items. Unilever also runs multiple facilities in Russia. In October 2024, the sanctions prompted the corporation to sell these facilities at a loss, making it practically hard to repatriate revenues. On the technical front, Siemens, a leading technology supplier, has a significant presence in Russia, spanning energy to industrial automation. However, when sanctions tighten, their infrastructure investments may be confiscated or highly taxed. Before this happens, the corporation intends to sell all of its assets in Russia. Meanwhile, the crisis extends beyond the figures on the balance sheet. Russia's retaliatory sanctions will result in higher expenses, difficult legal fights, and operational interruptions for these enterprises. Forced asset sales at severe discounts, combined with additional levies, make it impossible for foreign enterprises to function or even exit without incurring significant financial losses. The worldwide influence is also considerable. Potential investors may think twice before entering Russia, resulting in lower foreign direct investment. Meanwhile, industries, including energy,